Russia is halting its participation in a UN deal allowing Ukraine to export its grain from Black Sea ports. At least that's what the Kremlin is saying it will do. It said it's not getting what it was promised under the agreement. Moscow has complained about obstacles to its own exports of grain and fertilizer. The last ship carrying Ukrainian grain under the deal departed Sunday from the port of Odesa. Ukraine is one of the world's largest grain exporters. Last summer, Turkey and the UN brokered a deal to continue shipments through a corridor that helped alleviate a global food crisis. Our correspondent Matthias Bellinger joins me now from Kiev with more. Matthias, why is Russia threatening to pull out of this deal now?
What they're saying is that the part that would be in favor of them of this deal, in their favor, that this part has not been fulfilled. Under this deal, the international community, the Western countries, agreed not to sanction exports of agricultural products from Russia and fertilizer, which they have not. These products are not sanctioned. They can be exported, but Russia claims that sanctions, secondary sanctions, that means sanctions on shipments, on insurances for shipments, on the banking system, they obstruct these grain and fertilizer shipments, and they want these sanctions to be scrapped. That's, of course, not very likely because some of these sanctions, especially the banking sector sanctions, are at the heart of the sanction policy that the Western countries have agreed to. Russia has threatened to not extend the deal. The deal needs to be extended every 120 days, not to extend it previously as well, making the same demands, but has joined in just maybe hours or even minutes before the deal was to end. That would be tonight. We will see whether this will happen, but Russia has for now said that it will not join in unless its demands have been met.
How important has this deal been, Matthias, for Ukraine and for other countries in the world that rely on those grain imports?
When the war started, even before the war started, Russia announced drills in the Black Sea and blocked the Ukrainian ports. All the exports came to a halt and the grain prices rose immediately because Ukraine is one of the biggest suppliers of agricultural products on the world market. After this deal was closed last July, so 1 year ago, Ukraine has been able to ship 33 million tons of agricultural products, mostly grain, out of the country via this corridor. So that's quite a significant amount. It's not quite what Ukraine has shipped, has exported before the war, but it's already getting somewhere near there. So this has been a tremendous, this has eased the pressure on the world markets for food products immensely, and this pressure that was felt in the beginning of the war was especially felt in the countries of the Middle East and of Africa, and these are probably the countries that will suffer most from rising grain prices if Russia does not join in again.
Matthias, thank you very much for filling us in there. That was our correspondent, Matthias Bellinger, in Kiev. So if that deal is not concluded again by midnight, it will end. What could the suspension of the grain deal mean for countries in Africa? For insights on that, we're joined by DW's Felix Maringa in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Felix, what impact could the end of the Ukraine deal have on Africa?
Good afternoon. It will have devastating impacts on Africa. First things first, the Ukraine grain deal has ensured that the prices have at least not spiked so high, especially in the wake of the harsh economic times being experienced in Africa, the harsh climatic conditions that have been experienced in Africa, making sure that people do not have food, people suffering because there hasn't been constant food supply. So the Ukraine grain deal has ensured that the gap that had been left has actually been covered by this grain coming into the continent. Now, cutting that grain deal would mean that majority of homes in Africa, or majority of households who are depending on the grain from Ukraine will actually go on empty, go to sleep on empty stomachs. Some of the kids who are going to schools basically feeding from the grain will actually have to study on empty stomachs, and it will have much more devastating effects in the long run.
Well, when food security is undermined, of course, the results can be catastrophic. Talk to us briefly, Felix, about the knock-on effects of Africa's grain supplies being cut.
So the knock-on effect is, of course, the prices of the commodities will now skyrocket. They had been stabilized to a particular extent, but now they'll have to skyrocket. Things like fertilizer and farm inputs that had been helping out will also now go even higher, and that would mean that a majority of food supply will not be found. And in the Horn of Africa, there's been a humanitarian crisis. There's been conflict in countries like Somalia and Ethiopia, and this grain that has been coming in has been helping people who are displaced in those conflict regions. So the knock-on effect, the immediate knock-on effect is that the supply that is in the market currently, people will have to pay more for their food, and people will have to actually experience harder economic times into the future.
Felix, thank you very much. That was DW's Felix Maring reporting from Nairobi.